Welcome to The Memory Game, a podcast where I, Nathan Tuffin,
and I, Rob Beer, exchange voice notes as we carry out the important work of recording an emotional history of video games
for the betterment of future generations. This week, Rob makes us examine our compulsions as we discuss games that we continue to play past the point of enjoyment.
Hey there, Podbud. I've been circling the skies, ready to swoop down on a question, which I have now partially digested and am ready to regurgitate in pellet form, like you're my owl chicklet. So feast on this! The thing that I ended up thinking about as a consequence of our last question was the decision by Team 17 to include a slot machine in a children's game. And obviously that got me thinking about the idea of addiction. And I'm sort of cautious of trying to make light of addiction. It's obviously a very, very serious thing. And there's lots of things and sort of debate around addiction, whether you can be addicted to things that aren't substances, whether those things need to be differentiated. But I just thought, let's not get into that. But just thinking about that basic definition of addiction, of continuing an activity to the point where you can cause yourself harm, emotional or physical harm, developing symptoms such as anxiety, irritability, tremors or nausea. I don't think we've made those thresholds in anything. What we're really talking about is, and this will be our simple definition, what is a game that you have played past the point that you were enjoying it out of compulsion? And so I've been reflecting on my answers to those questions, and I think there's probably three games, or there's three types of game that I'm prone to getting compulsively addicted to. The first one is roguelike games. So the one that I've played most recently, and possibly most of, the three answers there are Fast and Light, Into the Breach, and Slay the Spire. And I'm going to focus on Slay the Spire because I haven't spoken about that game in the podcast. And the format of a roguelike is that there is a defined level structure, but as you play it until you die, gaining pickups and weapons as you go, which are different every time. So you rarely ever have the same setup with your character. And then once you die, you go back to the beginning, often holding on to one thing from your previous playthrough. And Slay the Spire doesn't let you do that specifically, but it gives you a perk at the very beginning, and that's randomized. So it means that every time you play it, it's slightly different, and yet the same, and yet different, in a very engaging and interesting way. And Slay the Spire as well is very tricky and hard. Even the best players in the world in it, they're not winning it every time, although they are playing on much harder difficulty settings than I tend to. And there's 4 characters. When I bought the game, there were 4 characters on it. And yeah, I lost months to trying to complete with the first character, finally did it. Then managed to accelerate through doing some of the other characters. And at that point, I sort of, I walked away from it, or tried to, and then got lured back into, as I say, there's these higher difficulty settings, and I just wanted, just had the itch to try and do the run again. And as I say, my success rate of what's called Slaying the Spire, so you have to do that, you have to complete all 3 bosses, and all 3 levels, each of which has got a boss, and then there's a bonus boss that you have to beat at the end. And my success rate for it is low. Maybe, even after all the time that I've played it, maybe it's 1 in 10 times. And doing a full run takes over an hour, I would say. But one of the things that has made it more compulsive for me is that I was playing it on the Switch, which means that it saves. You can sort of save mid-turn. You can be playing, as a card game, you'll be playing and then literally just put it down, go and make dinner, come back, pick it back up. And that ability just to resume this thing midway makes it very, very compulsive, and it means that when I'm not, even though I've left it in the other room, I'm still playing it in my head. I've still got the potentials flooding through my brain, and I had to be careful about playing it too late at night because I would end up having dreams about trying to play cards and not being able to play them, and that kind of thing. But I definitely, as I say, once I'd completed it with all the characters, that was a really natural ending point, and I walked away from it. And then something drew me back in, and I ended up just playing it for almost the same amount of hours in just an unclear, unending quest to just play it. And I couldn't work out why I was playing it anymore, and so I just had to delete it. I couldn't leave it there, sat on my Switch, because I knew that I would at some point be like, oh, I fancy playing that again. And then once I'd played it once, I'd be stuck for months again. So I had to delete it. The second category of game that is ripe for compulsive addictive behaviour is mobile games. And the one that I have deleted multiple times before I finally broke ties with it is Marvel Snap, which may feature in your answers as well. And that's one that it's multiplayer head-to-head, which is its own thing, isn't it, in terms of addiction. And you're sort of levelling up through it. So there's seasons which refreshed every week, but initially you're going up through the levels very quickly, and you're gaining new cards, and there's lots of new elements to the game. And often the most fun element of games is that onboarding process of learning all of the rules and how the mechanics of the games work. And because I played Marvel Snap when it was, pretty much as soon as it came out, there was lots to learn, and then there was still dropping content. They had obviously lots of plans for the content, and then all that slowed down, and I found that myself just playing, the same deck of cards against similar opponents. I sort of could see and predict what was going to happen, and you find your plateau where you're winning half your games, losing half your games, making no progression, and just questioning myself of why am I still playing this? And the answer was because it was right there on my phone. Every time that I went to check the time, I was like, I could also squeeze in a game of Marvel Snap. It's so quick as well. It's sort of 2 minutes to play a game, so you could literally squeeze in a game on the stairs, going up a building at work or whatever. And so, I deleted and reinstalled that game a few times before I finally managed to kick it into the long grass. But thinking about it now, though, it does make me want to play it. I think with Marvel Snap as well, there were some very, very satisfying synergies with that game, where you play cards and you had full control of what was about to happen. But the one I was thinking of specifically is this set of 3 cards that if you played together, it meant that you could do an insane amount of damage on 2 out of the 3, what's it called? No, in fact, all of them would get high scores, and then one of them would just get a point score of thousands, in a game where it was usually won with sort of 20 or 30 points. And it was the one, I think it might have been Odin, which repeats the triggered action when triggered, Black Panther, and then the one you play last is the one that deletes it and copies it in all the other places. And I think since I had that run of cards, they've negged it in some way because it was too powerful a combo. But even thinking about that now makes me want to just install it in the background and maybe see one more time what that feels like to play. And the third category of games, which I guess Marvel Snap fits into Venn diagram wise, is multiplayer games. And I think the peak of this for me was Call of Duty Modern Warfare. I think it was Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare might have been what it was called. And playing that at university in the third year with my housemates, we would pass it, because it was multiplayer. You could play split screen, but you could also play online. But you could only do that with one controller, and so it was a great sort of pass and play game. Like you'd watch, you'd watch other people play, and then it'd be your turn, and you'd have sort of like 10-minute blast at it. And I think that element of watching other people have a go and then being itching to have a go yourself, having limited access to it, really ramped up the excitement of it. And that was one where I was obviously supposed to be writing uni essays and doing my reading and stuff. And the living room my bedroom was closest to the living room. So I could, if I would go and do some work, I could hear everyone sort of playing it and egging each other on and shouting and stuff. And so that was one where, I had, that's the nature of addiction getting in the way of, that's a form of self-harm, I suppose, is that I knew that what I needed to be doing was sitting in a room reading and typing, and instead I was there's a rhyme there. I should have been reading and typing, and instead I was strafing and sniping. There you go. Very pleased with myself. I think I should leave that there. So those are my 3 games. What are the games that you have found yourself compulsively playing / addicted to, and what are the things that helped you finally wriggle free from their tendrils?
Hey, Strafe and Snipe. Thank you for this question, buddy. It's a really good one. It immediately got me thinking of dozens of games I could probably use as answers. But it does. It feels a little bit like we've taken no time at all to start exploring the ways in which video games are actually bad for us. So I guess we should probably do our best to try and avoid turning this sort of quaint history of our gaming past that we're producing into some sort of cry for help. Thanks also for that quite helpful definition you provided. I think it did help frame my answers a little bit, and trying to think more about games that I played beyond enjoying them. And likewise, I don't want to get mired in the sort of specifics of what defines addiction and stuff like that, but from doing a bit of Googling, the NHS website does include internet and gaming addiction in its list of like non-substances you can have serious issues with. And you can retrieve treatment for gaming addiction at the Priory, like the rehab centre. And definitely from examining my own compulsive behaviours with video games as part of answering this question, I think you can sort of quite clearly see that if your life became a bit unbalanced, things started to go a bit wrong, gaming could easily become a bit of a sort of pervasive force in your life and maybe an unhealthy escape. Though I could also imagine feeling a bit self-conscious, say if you were seeking treatment and you encountered someone who had done something like sold their house to fund a drug addiction, and then having to say something like, "Oh yeah, things have gone pretty bad. Last week I played Railroad Tycoon 2 for 12 hours straight." But harm is harm, right? So I recognised a lot of similarities in your choices to my own, and they helped me narrow mine down quite a lot. But an interesting place where we diverged that I wanted to mention is on the Switch, which I love playing on, but for some reason I've never really properly treated it like a portable console. And I play it far more like a traditional console still, like plugged into my TV, and I can't quite put my finger on why. I think part of it might be to do with the lack of commute, and I remember you saying that you got really addicted to FTL during your sort of hour-long journey into work years ago, but I've never really had that, so I suppose that's something that that's missed time that I could have had a Switch on the go. Or maybe it could just be that I think the Switch is my first ever portable console. I didn't really ever have a Game Boy other than the one you lent me to go travelling with, and I'm just not in the habit of using it that way. I think also there could be something to do with my eyesight. Like I need a big screen to see everything properly. My PC screen's like 32 inches, and I sit right in front of it, so there's something going on there maybe as well. So I want to start, obviously, by cheating and crowbarring in a couple of bonus games on top of my chosen 3, but I'll do it very briefly. I'm doing it because one thing I recognised in some of the games I've played too much or beyond enjoyment is the sort of completely futile pursuit of in-game achievements, and how that can keep me playing a game like way after I'm getting any joy from it. And my first example of that is Assassin's Creed 2, which is a brilliant game, and I'm sure most people are familiar with that franchise, which has probably become a bit bloated, but the concept's great and there's loads of good games within it. I decided for some reason to complete Assassin's Creed 2 to 100%, which meant like traveling around all of the ancient cities, doing things like collecting feathers and doing these sort of very repetitive mini missions. And I think there are these glyphs written on walls you've got to find. And I imagine I used probably a walkthrough or something to complete it. And it just sucked all the joy from the game after completing the story, which I really enjoyed. And I think ultimately in the end, it just became admin. It's just like some bland administrative task where you might as well be filing papers or filling out a spreadsheet or something. And I had something similar with Hotline Miami 2, which I don't know if you're familiar with those games, but if I remember correctly, Hotline Miami 2 was nowhere near as good as the first one. And it's quite a frustrating game because your character can die really easily, that's part of it, and you have to repeat bits in particular sequences. But for some reason there were just loads of achievements available in it, and I just became really fixated on getting a few. And there's also a thing in Steam where you can add your favourite achievements to your Steam profile, so your 5 or 6 Steam friends can see them if they ever decide to look at that page, which is very unlikely. But I remember one of the achievements sounding really good. I might have to look up what it was. So I endured that game for much longer than probably can be considered healthy, just for, a very vapid reason, really. So onto my main list. The first game that popped into my head was actually because of the mention of harm, even if in this case it's in a relatively mild form. And I decided to include it because this game gave me a physical reaction, which caused me actual pain, which I imagine is quite rare for types of people playing video games. So the game is the standalone version of DayZ, or DayZ for our American listeners, on the PC. So DayZ was originally a quite complex zombie survival mod for the military sim Arma 3, or maybe Arma 2, and due to its success, a developer took it on and then decided to launch a standalone version on Steam, which I got very, very popular overnight. It was suddenly all over Steam. Basically, the premise is that you get dropped into an abandoned region somewhere in Eastern Europe that has like a moderate number of zombies in it. I never saw that many. And then you have to raid buildings in towns and cities and collect weapons and armor and clothes and food and all sorts of stuff like that to stay alive. But I remember it being far too realistic. Like, you could sustain an injury from a very small fall, and then you'd have to hobble everywhere with a broken leg until you could like get a splint and a bandage and bandage yourself up, and you'd need to get a blood pack to make yourself up to full health. And it was really intricate in that way, and you could like get sick from eating the wrong foods or drinking stale water, and then your character would vomit everywhere and black out, and it was all stuff like that. And the zombies were quite tough to fight, but as always, the real danger was man, i.e. other players, of which there were many, and also it was permadeath, so you were constantly being sent back to square one, no matter how much you'd progressed, no matter how much stuff you'd gotten, or how well that previous run had gone. And the game stayed in early access for ages. I think it was the very first game I played in early access, and it was not a good introduction to that format. So for ages, it was riddled with bugs. There were loads of cheaters. There was a very predictably toxic community on all of the servers. But, I mean, having said all that, something about it was very Moorish and kept me going back to it. And I initially played it with some friends, which is where the real fun was to be had, obviously, as is often the case. But even that had loads of issues. So in early access, you couldn't be dropped into the game at the same location as your friends, or even really join it as a pair. So you couldn't, you weren't friendlies in the game. You just had to treat each other as such. And finding maps in game was almost impossible. They were really rare. All the road signs were written in like Cyrillic, I think, because it was in Russia. So you couldn't really properly read the road signs or very easily. So you'd have to Google a game map and then keep tabbing back and forth to your browser to do your best to work out where you were based on just signs around the village until you knew the map a bit better. But the map was huge. And then you'd have to, you'd be on comms with your friend, but you'd have to run to meet them. That could sometimes take as long as half an hour, even longer, and then often one of you get killed by a zombie or starvation or another player or something before you even met up. So we did have a few fun games, but they were so rare that most of my friends lost interest pretty fast. And then something about it just kept drawing me back in. And I think it speaks to something we discussed off pod a few days ago about, it was one of those games, of which there are many now, that truly taps into what is appealing about gambling, and the sense of potential for something great to happen, when in truth most of the time you're playing it, it's kind of a bust, really. So you can have loads of bad games in a row on something like DayZ, but then when you very occasionally get a good one, you get this real rush of endorphins, and it's the losing, isn't it? It's the losing that keeps you playing, much like with sort of any game of chance, like, you know, roulette or something like that you'd find in a casino. And when I mentioned this to you the other day, you seem to have a much better handle on the concept than I did, and maybe the sort of the chemical idea behind it. So I'd love to hear you talk about that a little bit, if you don't mind, and also relay your Apex Legends experience as an example, because that really made me laugh, and I also completely identified with it. Anyway, in the end, I carried on playing DayZ on my own, even though I can honestly say I never enjoyed it even once. But I think I just kept playing in pursuit of that maybe one good game, which never came. And because at its heart it was a horror game, which I'm terrible with horror games. I'm so jumpy. I don't like the atmosphere at all. And adding to that, the stakes are so high because, you know, one drink of stale water or gunshot or zombie swipe or whatever could kill you. I was constantly on edge, especially those few times I'd end up with, you know, like a good start. So like a camping stove and a rifle and a big backpack or something. So you'd be so afraid of dying. And those high stakes meant just that every gunfight or interaction with another player just gave me these dreadful adrenaline rushes. And I would genuinely have like a stiff neck or sore back or like sore arms, I think, from these adrenaline rushes for days after playing. I'd feel like an old man sort of hobbling around just from having played this game. And I was thinking about how good it was that you sort of had the self-control to delete games completely from your devices, even though, as you said, you did sometimes go back and reinstall them. And I think in general what happened with the games that I played compulsively is that I just sort of gradually went off them. I don't think I ever took any direct steps, or maybe I just started playing a new game and that kind of replaced it. But I do remember DayZ being the only one that I can remember where I took the same intervention as you and actually deleted it from my PC to stop myself from playing it. Which I was thinking earlier, that would probably not be as much of a deterrent now with internet speeds what they are. I bet I could probably download it in about a minute now if I wanted to. But maybe there's something in the act of deleting that helps stay away from it. So my second example is the game Middle-earth: Shadow of War for PS4, which is the sequel of Shadow of Mordor, which is a third-person action game, which is sort of set in a tenuous, non-canon version of the Lord of the Rings universe. Basically, you run around Mordor, killing orcs and getting into scrapes and trying to take the place over. And I really genuinely loved both games. I played through the story all the way through on both of them. They have this excellent game mechanic called the Nemesis system, where you have to sort of defeat Sauron's orcs, his lieutenants, in order to progress the game, and you have to do it in different ways. But they are randomly generated and they've got unique abilities and personalities. And once you defeat them, you can do things like turn them to work for you, or you sort of kill them in a gruesome way to intimidate the other lieutenants, or they might like escape the battle from you and live to fight another day. But let's say like you shot a barrel and set fire to them in the process of them escaping, then they'll reappear later as like Gortash the Burnt, or something like that. And it's really good. It kind of really fleshes out the game and makes it feel really alive. Or like, you know, sometimes you can get killed by a random grunt, you know, not a lieutenant, and then, you know, next time you see them, they've been promoted to a lieutenant themselves and they become really strong, they become your rival. So that all makes for an excellent game. But in the second one, Shadow of War, they added this major feature where you can build your own army of orcs, and you sort of use that to assault and take over these various fortresses that are around the game map. And then once you've got those fortresses, you have to defend them. And at first, it was like a really fun part of the game, and I quite like the mechanic for assaulting the fortresses. And I think you only have to take over a handful in order to complete the story. But then after the story, you could carry on doing the fortress stuff if you wanted to. And I just developed this really compulsive need to take over every single one. Like, the story wouldn't be complete until I'd done it. And it reminded me of playing GTA San Andreas, where there are like gang wars, aren't there, to take over little bits of territory, and how you really don't need to take over that many if you just want to progress in the game. But when I played that, I wanted to play until I had taken over every little strand of territory. And I think it's what you'd call an example of map painting, which I know is something you usually see in strategy games. And it's where all of the challenge is kind of gone from the game, but for the sake of completeness, you just keep going until the whole map has been, is been painted, is all yours. And much like Assassin's Creed 2, in the end, Shadow of War just became this big admin burden long before I'd actually, finished doing all of the taking all of the fortresses. And actually, when that final fortress fell, I just felt like a blessed relief that I could stop playing the game and can move on with my life. My final example is one that sits probably closest to true addiction, or at least compulsive behaviour, and it comes from your category of mobile games that you mentioned, which really makes sense. And really, I feel like I've probably got dozens of examples of mobile games, like ones that I've played habitually and simply because they're available, not because they're good. And I think there are some that I couldn't even tell you the names of because they're so throwaway, and it's such a saturated market, I probably couldn't even find it if I googled them. Marvel Snap definitely is one I completely got taken with, and I fully related to your struggles, even though I think we both agreed in lots of ways it is a really good game, but it did eventually, just like you, it became very monotonous for me. I never quite pulled the trigger on deleting it, but I just ended up playing the same decks over and over again. And I got really into using a Galactus deck, which is basically a Trolls deck, and involved just tricking the other player into thinking you're trying to get a high score in one area and then destroying all but one location with this big annoying Galactus move. So playing it also made me a jerk, as well as compulsively addictive. But yeah, so my actual example I'm going to use is a game I'm playing at the moment, and I'm using it just because it is so throwaway. It could be any of the games I've played beyond enjoyment on my mobile. It's called Narcos Cartel Wars, and it's as unique and imaginative as the name suggests. It's a Netflix mobile game. You have a little cartel base, and you produce and sell drugs. You build these little buildings, and then you have little armies of men, each one kind of run by a different narco, little character in the game, and then you raid computer locations and other players' bases, and it's so repetitive and grindy and slow. It just follows this same pattern that so many mobile games do, but it is briefly satisfying, and I think most importantly for me, you can play like 1 minute here, 2 minutes there, and I hate it. I absolutely hate it, but I'm still going, and I'll probably play a little bit later. And it really is, at its heart, it's pure compulsion, isn't it? You sit down, you have a minute to spare, and your brain yearns for it. I think my hands even yearn to sort of feel the weight of my phone. I can feel it. And I think it's so easy, sort of nowadays, you might feel judgmental about people who you see who, like, in every spare moment, they open up TikTok or Instagram or Facebook or whatever it is on their phones. But this is really a very similar thing, or at least I feel like the instinct is very much the same. It's just probably easier for us to swallow because it's a video game that we're reaching for and not social media. And in terms of harm, like you kind of mentioned where Call of Duty was keeping you from your studies in uni, one thing I became very aware of recently was during my 3 months parental leave that I just did looking after my son, he'd be crawling around and playing with his toys, and I'd be doing my best to be attentive and join in. But babies can be boring and they are easily distracted. And in those moments where he was off bashing Duplo pieces together or fixated on CBeebies or something, it was really very easy to feel the pull of that game in my pocket. And I noticed myself more than ever having to fight that instinct so he didn't have to compete for my attention with my phone, which is obviously something that all parents have to battle with nowadays, and all of us try and fail at to some degree. So, there it is. One of the ills of game addiction now is potentially just becoming a less than great parent. Though I think, let's face it, future generations have no hope when it comes to technology addiction. They're basically going to have sort of mobile phone operating systems hardwired into their frontal lobes. So I'm sure he won't judge me when he comes of age. That's my answers anyway, buddy. Great question again. Let me know your thoughts. If you can pry yourself away from your bloody games. Am I right?
Hey, old man sore arms. Thanks for getting back to me. I've been researching your answers and reflecting on them, and there's so much in there that's recognisable and relatable. And I also appreciate some of the differences that manifest themselves in the way that we get hooked on games. The first one that you were talking about was Assassin's Creed 2 and that sense of 100%ing the game. I don't know that I've ever done that. I think the closest I might have come to doing it was on a Harry Potter game the first Harry Potter game on PlayStation 1. And I might have nearly 100% of that just because it was so easy and required so little. It was built for children, and I was playing it as a 12-year-old or something, and it just didn't require that much to 100% it. But generally, I'm aware of getting caught in that trap of filling up those percentage bars. I know my friend Ollie did that once when he was unemployed. He completed one of the GTAs, and it required him searching out all of the feathers. And I'm sure Assassin's Creed 2 was probably the last one where that was achievable. They just kept adding more and more, didn't they? So I'm sure there's all sorts of tiny little fetch quests that it requires you to do to fill that in. But I was thinking about what it is that makes that people drawn to doing that, and looking it up online. One of the theories behind it was self-determination theory, which is this idea that by 100% in games, it's that sort of controlling the controllable thing where the world is messy and chaotic. There's a sort of psychological safety to the ordered world of computer games, and being able to paint the map or to tick every box feels very satisfying in that context. I remembered that when I worked as a trainer for the NHS, one of the things I had to do for a while was administrate the learning system that we had for junior doctors coming in and doing their training. And it was all of the sort of mandatory training they have to do before they were able to start working. So, things like GDPR, before GDPR existed, data protection it would have been. And one of the ones, there was 2 versions of a course called Care of the Back, one of which was for people who moved patients and one was for people who worked in offices. And because the administration system we had was really sort of crude, we had to give people instructions to just do the courses that related to them. And they were coming in on their sort of first day as they were doing rotations into new hospitals. So they came into our hospital and we gave them this list of courses that they were required to do. But there was a subset of the doctors who would log on to the system, see that there were these courses to complete, and when you completed a course, it filled in this green bar, this sort of progress bar that showed you that you completed it. And there were so many doctors that would just do all of the courses regardless. I mean, they were hammering through them, but they weren't engaging with them. It was, one of those awful, like 21st century, late capitalism torture devices that we've created for ourselves is mandatory training. And they were, like just hammering through these courses, but they didn't need to. They would have been more efficient stopping, reading the instructions of what they needed to do, and just do the ones that were required of them. But I feel like that's still related in some way. These junior doctors have got A's in every exam they've ever sat, and the idea of leaving a bar unfinished or uncompleted, I feel like it had more to do with that than just the simple act of not following instructions. The other sort of completionist thing that you talked about there was achievements in games, which I guess is slightly different because that's the sort of thing that they call sort of gamification. And that was a big buzzword for ages in a bunch of industries. The sort of logging in daily to your fitness app or to your getting your steps in and getting little badges and notifications. This is sort of smartphone era behavioural psychology stuff, wasn't it? And I wonder whether sort of achievements sort of fit into that world. There was a podcast I listened to for a little while that was just, I think it was called like Achievement Hunters, and they were having a competition between them to try and like get the most Xbox points, because each achievement also got you Xbox points, which did nothing other than let you brag to your friends about the points that you got. And they ended up playing like loads of awful games just because they knew the achievements were gettable. And then I've played games that since, like Stanley Parable was a great example of this, where they've put achievements into the game which are impossible to achieve. Like one of them is to play the game for 1,000 years or something, or to not play the game for 10 years, which is, I guess that one is technically possible, but just essentially there to try and frustrate and probe at the act of what you're doing and making you question whether any of it is worth it. And I tried to research what that Hotline Miami achievement might have been, and there were two that I thought sounded like they could have been it. One was Trophy Addict, which was the trophy that you get if you get all of the other trophies. And I feel like there's something appealing about that, isn't there? And self-referential that might have drawn you into it. But the other one, which also, I can picture you saying these words, these are my rifles, these are my guns, which might be a quote of something, but I don't know what that would have been. The next game you mentioned was DayZ, and your relationship with that being, for the majority of time, not enjoying it, even when you were playing with friends, not being able to find them. And it reminded me of, there's a browser game you can play called GeoGuessr, which just drops you in, so it looks like Google Maps, it just drops you a random location in the world, and then you have a sort of atlas, and you have to pinpoint where you think you are in the world. And the sort of hardcore way of doing that is not allowing yourself to look at road signs and stuff, which is just very reminiscent of what you're describing there. But you can't use all your real world knowledge because it's a totally fictional place, and instead you have to sort of begrudgingly learn the environment of this totally fictional town, which I guess, is rewarding in its own form, isn't it? But GeoGuessr feels like you're learning something culturally significant, but beyond Mastermind or some obscure pub quiz, I don't know when that knowledge is ever going to be meaningful again. The specific thing that you were talking about, I suppose, was that idea of it being addictive because of the fact that for the majority of time you weren't enjoying it, and then occasionally you would have some sort of great run. Whether that was because you were given stuff that was great to start with, or just you managed to, have that sort of emergent gameplay experience where one thing changed into another and you were able to tell some interesting story or funny events unfolding or whatever. But it reminded me of this idea of Skinner boxes, which I will then use to chain on to talk about Apex Legends and why I think that's very addictive for some people, and was something that I was happy to just walk away from. And so Skinner, I think it might have been James Skinner, but then I could have easily checked that and didn't. Instead, I just read the parts of the Wikipedia page that I needed to refresh my memory. So Skinner was this 50s, 60s American psychologist, and is the head of a school of thought which were called the behaviorists. So I came across his work first in education, because it was an early part in teacher training, is this idea of behaviorism and the idea of being able to reinforce behaviour with reward, and that was a psychological explanation for how learning happens. And all of his work was based around, or the most famous work was built around rats, and basically trying to get rats to press a button. And what they found was, if you gave rats some cocaine as a reward for pressing the button, so I don't know if they can't have injected them. There must have been just some water drops with cocaine or something. But the rats pressed the button and it gave them cocaine. And what they found was, if you had it so that the button, when you press the button, it gives them cocaine, they would press the button for a while, and then eventually they would grow bored and no longer press the button. But if you made it so that the pressing the button occasionally or randomly gave them a reward of the cocaine, they would continue pressing the button to the exclusion of all other things, and would essentially not feed themselves and just sit and tap the button forever until they died. That wasn't on Wikipedia. That's my exaggerated reading of that. But the takeaway of that is that the sort of formula for getting people hooked on thing is reward plus randomness, and it's been absolutely perfected by mobile games and roulette machines and all of that. And I think it's part of the big draw behind something like Fortnite or Apex Legends is there's so many of you on the map that for most people, a single game loop usually ends in quick failure, but occasionally chains together in a very satisfying and rewarding way. That just makes the adrenaline rush of that even higher. And because it's seemingly sort of random, that helps hook it on even further. If it was consistently enjoyable or consistently rubbish, then that'd be no good. But the intermittent enjoyment of it is actually the thing that keeps you hooked. I think why that didn't happen for me with Apex Legends is I didn't have the fun bits, because it's a big old map and the game loop can be up to 20 minutes. And it's one where you sort of parachute in, you're running around scrambling to get weapons and different ammunition and stuff, and then the circle is slowly encircling. The first game, they call them Battle Royals, don't they? The first one I saw like that was called PUBG, which I can't remember what that stands for.
Player Unknown's Battlegrounds
or something. And then there's obviously been is the formula behind Fortnite, which adds in sort of base building and stuff. But basically, Apex Legends what they did on top of that was make it first person, and it looks more like sort of Call of Duty / Halo type thing. But I think I played 30 or 40 rounds of it and maybe got 2 kills. I never got that peak experience where it was fun. I just felt like I was a deer roaming on other people's territory, ready to be shot and sniped at. And there's that thing as well where it does the kill cam. So you die and you're like, how, like someone's cheating, and then it shows you the camera angle of what they've done, and you're like, what? How was I supposed to know they were there? Or like, when I shoot people like that, it doesn't work. So I don't know. It aged me 10 years playing it. It made me instantly feel like the world had left me behind. And so that was nice and easy to step away from. And that was the last thing I wanted to look back on, I suppose, which is that act of deleting games from my phone at the point where I know that they're doing me no good. And it comes back to parenting, I suppose. I've done enough meditating and mindfulness stuff that I can sort of recognise the patterns of it, even if I'm not a great practitioner and I'm not meditating as much as I want to be. I probably have a 10-to-1 ratio of how much I talk about meditating to how much I actually meditate. Yeah, it's what it comes down to for me is the ability to catch yourself in the process of doing and to be able to change your action. That's as good a definition of mindfulness that you can get, just being able to catch yourself. And the draw of the phone is too mighty, the temptation is too much, and my willpower is too weak, that the only remedy that I have is deletion, total abstinence. So that's my tip. Get off your phones, delete this podcast, walk out and live in the trees, something like that. Looking at my notes as well, I failed to talk about Shadow of Mordor and the map painting technique, but I suppose that fits back into the territory of talking about psychological safety and what was the wording? You're going to hear the page turn as I refer back to self-determination. But also for you, I think an element that fits outside of that is you love telling stories, and RimWorld hasn't featured in your answers and is something that I know you have ploughed the hours into, but I would separate out from being part of something that you're just addicted to or compulsively playing, because going back to this idea of mindfulness, it sounds like every time you play it, you're just hooked into the stories that it generates, and that is a very different experience to just trying to fill a bar or work towards the exterior motivation of getting an achievement. that the game is telling you to do. And feels like a very mindful way of playing, being able to get lost in the stories. So yeah, keep on painting those maps. Those are good maps. While putting my answers together for this week's pod, I had a conversation with my friend Tom, who I work with at the NHS, doing the admin for those training modules. And he told me a story that I thought I'd relay here as a way of sort of closing out on the idea of frustration and addiction and compulsion. And I think it's a lovely visual metaphor for all of the endeavours that we have in computer games. So it'd be a nice way to leave it. We were playing Grounded, which is a survival game and has that element of sort of gathering resources. And I was teaching him the game. It's the first time he played it. And he said something like, oh man, any game that needs resources gathering and I'm there, I'm done, I'm in. And he was talking about how he loves that process of gathering things together, and that's something he finds really sort of satisfying. Then told me the story about Valheim, which he played a bunch of, and he loved that element of, sort of gathering wood and stone and making things. And he was saying it's sort of been killed by this update. So I think the first thing that happened was that modders created this, and then eventually it was added into the main game, which is now a sort of creation mode, and that's quite a common thing that's true in Minecraft as well. And it means that when you're gathering these resources and building these buildings, but in the back of your mind, you know that like you could just make something way more impressive if you just switched over to that other mode, and how that sort of fundamentally changes the experience in some way. And he was saying he'd made this sort of janky tower at the edge of overlooking this water. And it had taken him ages because he had to sort of gather all the stuff and like schlep it over to this point, which is inaccessible, to build it and stuff. Then he'd loaded the game and they'd installed some sort of patch, which meant that the physics had tweaked slightly, or something in the underpinning code had changed slightly. And so he loaded into the game, and in front of his eyes, the tower just sort of crumbled into the sea, crumbled into the water. And I just thought, that's a beautiful metaphor. It's a sort of Buddhist sand painting thing of watching your empires fall. And he hasn't gone back to it yet, but he's talking about maybe trying to, what would it mean to painstakingly reconstruct that? And would he change it? Would he make it the same? These are questions that come down to where you find meaning and purpose in life. And I just thought that was such a lovely way to describe all of these things. Why are we doing what we're doing when we all know that eventually this tower will crumble into the sea?
Hi, this is Tom, and Rob's just asked me to follow up with my thoughts and feelings about the Valheim tower story. So, first sort of thoughts are that like Rob was saying, there are lots of mods for it now, so you can just build. But we'll build with any tools, any kind of materials, but I just love the kind of purist sort of, how the game's supposed to be played, like going around painstakingly pickaxing like these rare sort of materials from like rare sites on the game. And this is exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to build this castle on this island from like this rare black marble, which you could only find on these. Well, you had to mine these skeletal bones of like giants, and it took forever. But it was ultimately rewarding, I think, because you see what you built. It did take so long, but like little by little, it became this mammoth project, and there's so many times where I was just like, this is too much, but just carried on with it. And I started populating the kind of the grand hall of my castle, and I didn't actually manage to put any furniture or any kind of things in the tower before the update ruined it. Just a bit about that as well. I started reading about the update and I was like, quite excited, new biome. And then I read that these people who had installed it had structures on the edge of the biome, the Mistlands biome, and something with the physics, or the land had slightly changed because it's like procedurally generated. The new update just tinkered with the landscape and it just completely changed my island a little. Well, not completely changed it, but changed it like a little bit. So the tower just decided it wasn't gonna stay there anymore, and it just crumbled. And the painful thing was that it just crumbled over about 10 minutes, in little bursts. So one part of it would crumble, then another part, and it just took ages. I just stood there watching it, like feeling quite deflated, but also these things kind of happen. I would love to got a video of it, actually. I'm thinking about maybe going to a backup and seeing if I can find if it's still there, and I can get a little video and maybe like a screenshot. But yeah, I think I'm not too sad about it. It was I had it in that moment, like nobody else saw it but me. It was for me, really. I enjoyed building it, enjoyed seeing it. And I mean, I didn't enjoy watching it crumble, but there is something about people, you build a sandcastle. Some people love building a sandcastle and then destroying it. I had a friend who used to build model airplanes. It used to take him forever, and then one day he was just like, let's set them on fire and throw them out the window. It's just something about that destruction which we just, I guess we complete something and then we're like, well, let's just blow it up. But yeah, I don't know what your thoughts about that are. But yeah, that's my story.
Memory complete. Uploading memory.
Thanks for listening to The Memory Game. If you would like to share a gaming memory with us, ask us a question or send us your thoughts, you can contact us at memorygamepod@gmail.com or on Instagram @memorygamepod.